diplomatic machinations, and it's said that one of his problems was when he was in the diplomatic service in East Germany, he wasn't told about the collapse of East Germany, and so he scrambled over the wall, and ever since then, and to escape. Russians believe that Russia is this holy place, and basically the whole thing comes from an idea that Constantinople has collapsed. So Byzantium is finished. Putin is now the new Constantinople emperor, as it were. The Roman Empire has collapsed, so he is the head of the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church has collapsed, so he is the Pope. So what you have built up over the ages, which has built up what Putin is today, a dictator, is the fact that he believes he is the head of the Byzantine, the Roman, he is the Pope, he's the Son of God. And a lot of these ideas came from Ivan the Terrible over there, but whatever it is, that is what sets him up. And he's been told by Cyril, who is the Archbishop of Moscow, that you have to capture Kiev in order to have this so-called Russian Empire, because the spiritual head of the Russian Empire is Kiev. So you have this fantastic, odd sort of situation. You have a huge big statue of Vladimir in Russia, which is a meter and a half higher than the one in Ukraine. So they both look to Vladimir as the center of their civilization. And so basically, Putin's whole problem is, he has to say, Ukraine doesn't exist, it's only Russia. And that Vladimir is the beginning of the whole situation. And so you have this, at the moment, you have Vladimir Kerensky, the Ukrainian, Vladimir Putin, the Russian, they both got the same name. And so Vladimir is the center of the whole thing. Of course, just in passing to pass about, Vladimir, of course, is also a bit of a shadowy figure, but he was supposed to be a complete rogue, kind of a harem and fooling around, but he was completely changed, and then he began to, and as you say, but it was Yaroslav. So what we have now is Putin trying to build up this Russian Empire. But we just stated, what happened was in Russia is that in the Crimean War, the Russians were trying to get down to the Mediterranean. They don't have a port. So all the energy of the Russians from Peter the Great, they were trying to get a port up in the north in the Baltic. So they built Petersburg up there. He built Petersburg up there. And then they also tried to get down into the south. And they tried to get down to the south, so hence we have the Crimean War. And when the Crimean War, they lost. And they lost face. They realized that the army wasn't up to much, the discipline wasn't up to much, and Russia was in a bad way. So, but they got their act together and said, okay, we're not going to go south, we're not going to go to west, we're going to go east. So they go rushing across the whole of Asia and reach China. And they reach China there, and then they're stopped by the Chinese people. So you've got about 120 different time zones and countries and cultures, and they all build up into what we know as Russia. So Putin tries to combine all these, as all the Russians also have done. But the point is, how do you do it? Okay, so at the moment we're in the middle of this process of Putin. He is trying to control and to build up the Russian Empire. Now, just in passing, what happened was the northern branch of the Mongols controlled Russia in the north. The southerns were also controlled, but they had more freedom. So the Ukrainians like to say they're more freedom-loving, and the Russians are Mongolians. So because the Russians, for example, in China, the Yanzhou, the Chinese were only controlled by the Mongols for less than 100 years. But the Russians were controlled by Russia for 300 plus years. The Russian Tsar had to go to the center of the Mongolian place, had to kowtow, had to kneel down, and he said, I am your servant to the Mongols, and they can never forget that. So for 300, 400 years, the Russian Tsar had to go to the Mongols and bow down, I'm your servant, I'm your slave. And so all this Mongolian business is in the Russian psyche. So we could say probably truly that if you scratch a Russian, you find a Mongolian. And the Mongolians took over the psyche of, that's why you've got this dictatorship. Even today, as a symbol of this thing, is you go to Moscow and you go to Kremlin. You've got the Kremlin, which means castle. Then you have the Church of the Domitian, and they're all within the walls of the Kremlin. Now, in Europe, you have the king, the state power, and you have the church power. But in Russia, they're united. So he is God. He's the Son of God.